We're fortunate to have not only the director, the screenwriter, the producer, Oren Jacoby, right here with me. My Italian Secret, The Forgotten Heroes. And I thought I was the Italian secret, but
so you have a few brothers.
I have a few brothers.
There you go, and sisters.
But the whole idea of this movie is a little-known story, even among Italian Americans, what happened during World War II, and this documentary kind of illustrates it very well. Can you kind of give a little thumbnail sketch to our viewers at home what to expect?
Well, it's a story of, as you say, little-known, untold story of Italians in World War II who risked their lives to save Jews and other refugees, partisans, other people who were running away from the Nazis, who were in danger of being sent to death camps or shot on the spot by the Nazis who'd invaded northern Italy in World War II. Not many people even remember or think about the history of what happened in Italy in World War II, but they went from being an ally of the Germans when Mussolini was in charge to when the Americans and the other allies invaded in 1943, suddenly there was almost a civil war in Italy because half the country wanted to get rid of Mussolini, the other half was holding on to him. The fascists were still in control in the north, the allies were controlling the south, but the Nazis invaded very quickly as soon as the Americans came in, and northern Italy was an occupied country. And the Nazis proceeded to go around rounding up anybody who was, they perceived, anti-fascist, a deserter from the Italian army, of which there were thousands, tens of thousands. Jews, of course, were the first on the list, and other refugees. So they were rounding up, sending them to death camps, and our film tells the story of a number of the remarkable individuals who are willing to risk their life to save these people.
Anyway, my family, they're called contrafascista, in fact, the people that were against Mussolini. The Mussolini was extremely powerful, and but you know, in southern Italy, you know, they always had a way of working around. They had a lot of workarounds, and they sort of made sure that you know, that treachery wasn't exercised.
Well, you mentioned the workaround. That's a big part of this film, is the ingenious ways that people came up with to do the opposite of what the authorities told them to do. If they were told to expose Jews, they hid Jews. If they were told to do one thing, they did it. They found another tricky way to do another thing. And the most exemplary hero, the guy who's the main story in the film, is the great athlete, the great bicycle champion, Gino Bartali, who was kind of, in 1940s Italy, was kind of Babe Ruth and Clark Gable rolled into one. He was a national hero because he just won the Tour de France, and everybody in Europe idolized him, so the Italians were very proud of him. And he had this, you know, went on to win another Tour de France after the war, 10 years later, the only person who ever did that, lived his whole life, never talked about what had happened to him during the war. And just before he died, someone outed him. They exposed that he'd had this secret activities that he'd been up to in the war, that he had traveled because he was a champion, because he could move around when other people couldn't. The Nazis, you know, knew who he was. They waved to him, and you know, he was a champion. He was like a pop star. Sure. And inside the frame of his bicycle, he put fake ID cards, secret documents that he would bring. There was a whole network in northern Italy where they were hiding Jews in monasteries and convents all over Tuscany and Umbria. And he would deliver these documents, and then people with fake IDs, with Christian names, would then be able to escape the country.
Baptism certificates,
yeah,
everything.
Yeah.
Which were, all they needed was the thing called the Francobollo, which is the seal.
Exactly.
And every Italian carries one.
And they carried the Francobolli. They somehow got Francobolli that were from the southern towns, which were in Allied hands, so they couldn't check, they couldn't verify if these people were really from there or not. And so thousands of people were saved.
Excellent. And what brought you to the project?
Well, it's a wonderful story. Speaking of Italian Americans, I have a wonderful Italian barber who his name is Salvatore Macri, who I've gone to for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And one day I was getting up out of the barber chair, and another guy was sitting down. And my barber, who's a very great guy, said, "Oh, you should meet this guy, Oren Jacoby. He just got nominated for an Oscar." And the guy was sitting down said, "That's funny. I need a director. I need a filmmaker." And his name was Joe Perella. He's a financier who had read a story in the Wall Street Journal that was called An Army of Schindlers, that was about Italy in World War II, and the fact that unlike the rest of Europe, where most of the Jews were killed, in Italy, 80% of the Jews survived the war. And so he wanted to tell the story, and he was looking for a filmmaker to do it.
Amazing. You know, we're approaching Columbus Day, and right now Columbus went, in fact I was with a niece and nephew of mine, and we were talking about it last year, and I said, oh, you're off Columbus Day, isn't that wonderful, Italian-American Columbus Day? And they proceeded to lecture me on the politically correct interpretation of Columbus Day means today.
Right.
And it's not the way we grew up. We always took, as Italian Americans, we took pride in Columbus. And, you know, every historical figure, you know, who was a slaveholder, who was, you know, not the best light. But if you weigh everything at that time, it was like going to Mars. You know, it was, exploration was not commonplace. And certainly he changed the shape of the globe, at least. And the idea of undermining that is really not proper, I think. And the fellas that were behind this movie have the same feeling, don't they?
Yes, they wanted, you know, they feel that Italian Americans, you know, partly due to popular culture, have been identified with the mafia, with, you know, the famous jokes about Italians in World War II, that the tanks all, you know, went in reverse, whatever the nasty comments were, or you know, the characters in Jersey Shore, you know, they said, this is not really what Italian Americans are like. This is an inaccurate picture of who we are. And they, you know, were interested in presenting a more realistic picture. I mean, there's another interesting connection the film has. There's really two connections with Columbus Day that are interesting. A year ago on Columbus Day, at the annual Columbus Day Parade in New York City, they hold a gathering the night before at the Waldorf Astoria. And the honoree last year was Joseph Perella.
Lovely.
And we showed a sneak preview of this film. And I got to tell you, there were a lot of proud Italian Americans in the hall that night.
Lovely, lovely.
And the other interesting connection, I mean, this is sort of comes back to the themes of the film, of Italians and Jews sort of looking out for each other in the war. For hundreds of years it wasn't known, but just the last 2 or 3 years, documents have been discovered that make it very clear that most likely Columbus was either a Jew or what they call a Marano, a Jew who had converted, because a lot of the documents that he wrote were in the language that only Jews used, and there were other connections that he had to Jewish merchants in Genoa.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Well, you know, being in the Mediterranean culture, it's amazing. I know a lot of similarities, and in business and growing up in New York, the best partners are between a Jewish fellow and an Italian guy that went to school together, and they became like lifelong friends and partners. My Italian Secret to Forgotten Heroes, it's the world premiere, 92 minutes, English and Italian, La Lingua Italiana, so if you want to sit there and enjoy the Italian language, it's there. Oren Jacoby, and one of our Long Island favorites, Isabella Rossellini, who does a lot of work here.
Lives in Bellport.
Lives in Bellport, and she, in fact, I'm one of the film commissioners. Another film commissioner has a center out in Bellport that she's gives all of her time and helps. And she's a remarkable woman who does the narration. And
she was wonderful to work with. I was thinking she's in Bellport, she's local, we can work easily together. Turned out she was touring Europe with her one-woman play, so we recorded the narration in Paris. But that wasn't so bad either. So we met in Paris at a recording studio and did the narration, and she was fabulous.
Well, I'm pretty sure she was a delight. Not many takes with her, right?
No, not many takes. One more thing I just want to say about the film. It's not just, you know, for people who are interested in Italy and people who, you know, are of Italian descent. I think one of the interesting things about this film, really what intrigued me and made me want to look into the story, was the question, what makes a person willing to risk their life to save somebody else? All these Italians were kind of on the spot. If they hid someone or helped to rescue someone, they knew that they could be shot on the spot by the Nazis, or their families could be pulled out and shot or sent to a death camp. And yet, tens of thousands of them were willing to do it. And, you know, we set out thinking, well, can we answer this question? Can we ask people, why did you do this? And of course, the real reason any kid knows is why, you know, how do you choose between good and evil? You know what feels right. You know what's the right thing to do. And they knew what the right thing to do was, and they were brave enough to do it.